no gardens and landscape, to in cities, limiting themselves to parks and so-called gardens, public parks, Nana Nani's gardens, so on and so forth. And when you travel abroad and when you start looking at mythology, when you start looking into history, these concepts are often feeling limited, and therefore you also wonder why can't the idea of the green or the idea of landscape extend itself into the idea.
It actually started, I think, a couple of years back. It started about 4 years back when we were sitting in the office and saying, what is the Indian garden? And the moment one starts talking about physical evidence, one quickly tends to sort of go to the gardens of the Mughals, or the gardens of the British, or the Rathod gardens. But there's not too much about domestic gardens or gardens sort of vernacular gardens. So just the idea of the art of making gardens. So we set up something that was called Million Gardens at that point in time. What we really did is that we wrote to friends across the country, anybody and everybody, friends, students, anybody who was willing to help, and said, would you like to send us some examples of what you consider is the idea of a garden? Very few spaces actually allow us to try anymore. The garden actually allows you to experiment with life in that little yard. And I think that's important if you want to begin to understand the larger sort of largerness of cities or urbanity or regional planning and so on and so forth. You need that laboratory from where to begin your work.
Look at forests, and if you were to look at Bombay, and I've actually purposefully cropped out South Bombay, you'll actually see there's a huge amount of potential. So what occurred to me was that actually we're looking at things in a particular way that don't allow us to see the reality of what is actually there. So to answer or respond to Samira's query, there are forests in our city, but whether we are recognizing this and whether we are actually noticing the pattern. And I put New York in next to it because you realize how constricted it is and how much we valorize that as a system of nature within the city, something that's completely bounded. So if you actually looked at Ahmedabad, maybe about, this was done about 2.5 years ago, you can't deny that there are settlements, and we map each one with their water body and the settlement with respect to its relationship and road patterns to Ahmedabad. So there's an entire ecology of settlements, not just one city, that we have to talk about. And what I'm suggesting here is that the forest is actually a kind of imagination. It's an imagination where there is a much more complex ecology that permeates through the city because the city and because the settlements are open and can allow for this. So when you look at it, actually you can look at all the different types of categories of landscape that are forest-like, from an orchard to a plantation to even fields of certain kinds where agriculture is done, as types of forest.
I think this is a very important moment for not only us as a community, but largely for the profession, that we have such a well-articulated and provocative, I would say that, because for me there's a provocation here which I read very, very clearly, to bring landscape both as a discipline, as a clarification of what it could mean, what its potential meanings are, so coherently as an exhibition. I love this sort of idea that the garden is finite, it has a boundary, just by the nature of it being something man is trying to create a dialogue in a healthy engagement with nature, and therefore it can't be boundless because nature has to be sort of bound that man can begin to actually deal with it in some ways. Aesthetics and landscape, how they have traditionally developed, are absolutely interlinked, and therefore we separate these as silos in which we try to operate and understand. We are actually undermining even our sensibilities as practicing architects, interior designers, and designers in the broadest sense. And I think a very interesting discussion could be, when we talk about conservation, for example, for say the Agra gardens. I mean, there's a whole narrative that one has to construct there, because the narrative, if you have to try to create the relationship of the landscape of the Banaras Ghats, which also Aniket is thinking hard about, it is a different narrative because it is a living, religious kind of imagination which makes the water sacred, however dirty it might be. There's a wonderful imagination of how you imagine transitions, which in architecture and urban design lacks completely. And so that kind of, I think those narratives, whether it's for pedagogy, but also for practice, are the ones we have to surface. Otherwise you're going to get, again, end-state kinds of solutions, which governments are in a hurry to do because, it's a statistical architecture of GDP and how much you're achieving, how many square kilometers you've done, etc.
Just to sort of, and I also tend to empathize with the fact that, which is again, like I say, this discussion can go anywhere, but also tend to empathize with the fact that because of the electoral sort of cycles that we have, there is always a sense of emergency, and that sense of emergency doesn't allow for the right thing to be done. And I think the smart thing would be to, like you're saying, plan the more geological cycles in place, and at the same time do the annual cycle.
I think, the example of the quarry for people is one such example where the transitional is much more important in that imagination. Sorry, that's going back to the exhibition.
No, there's an optimism in the exhibition which actually I feel is, and it's got to do with this boundedness. And I'm stating this now precisely because sometimes when this discussion becomes about governments and power and all that, you just don't know where as a practitioner, where you can engage with that kind of scale of operation. The optimism here is that you can, that in so many of the cases, it's an individual act. It's an individual act which is bounded, as you said, in which you are engaging with something profound, and there is the possibility of an imagination that's much larger.
Bringing food into the city and growing it for yourself in the community, I think changes the way we interact with it. I think in India it's still beginning to happen. That's one thing. And the other point I just want to make is that when we talk of gardens, it's quite a privileged position. People who have gardens, especially in India, compared to the West, where people participate in their gardens. Like they don't have a mali, right? They are actually doing a garden. When you said that there's a ritual that has to happen every day, in India we're kind of divorced from it because we will only just go and sit in it, right? We will enjoy it, we will walk in it, but we don't really participate. Do you think, Aniket, that's had an influence in how we actually design our gardens and what it means to our psyche?
I think the moment it becomes a very urban sort of phenomenon, it is only those who come to a designer who don't partake with their garden. The others actually enjoy their garden. So, the chaps who don't really want to engage with the soil are the guys who walk up to a landscape architect. The guys who want to engage with the soil will do the gardens themselves. Or they might at the most have one or two conversations about some plans or the other, but they don't actually want anybody to design it. So, with those last examples that we mapped, are people living in cities who grow their own gardens. I wouldn't necessarily say that people don't work with the gardens or don't have a connection. Certainly those who walk up to people like you and me probably are not, they're looking at the garden as an artifact, as a garden, not in a distant, they're happy to supervise it at some level, but they don't want to work on it themselves, which is not very different from the Mughal gardens. I mean, the Mughal kings didn't really work on the garden as much as they supervised the gardens a little bit, and then they enjoyed it for pleasure, which I think is also fine. I mean, according to me, a garden is many things for many people, and I wouldn't want one against the other. I think all those facets are very, very important. So somebody. So first of all, I think that Spade is one of the most important things that has happened in the discourse of, I wouldn't say design, and I wouldn't say architecture, because it's more than that. I would say it's one of the most important things that is happening at the level of bringing societal consciousness to the idea of how do we conduct ourselves in our society.
Landscape art and people. For many of us, it can be very eluding in the sense that, art is something that a lot of us don't find ourselves very easily comfortable with. As a common man, art has been something that is often termed elitist. And so it was important for us to bring this idea of art along with this idea of landscape. Landscape again, primarily because of the exhibition and what it started provoking to all of us who have happened to see Mr. Bhagwat's office put it together and personally have many discussions on the subject.
So to give you an example, I mean, somebody has done work at CST, you've shown your work in public spaces and, landscape. So we need to kind of understand. At a superficial level, one can say what one is subjected to in this grand city of ours is largely kitsch. At a, if you see public art at corners, etc., one is being subjected to some very awful stuff. It's all very well to say that, look at those grand buildings, old and new, but the spaces between those grand buildings are not doing us any kind of favor. This is a very ill-served city. I would say, in terms of what public spaces are occupied for, are used for, we are an ill-served nation.
Each of the public notice works are essentially speeches historic speeches delivered at some moment in time. The third public notice actually takes its place in the risers of the steps. So it's the interstitial space between two steps where the artwork is really located. So as people walk into the museum, they see this illuminated staircase, and you read as you ascend. And as you read, some of us may recognize these words. It says, "Sisters and brothers to America, it fills my heart with joy unspeakable." These are Swami Vivekananda's words delivered on September 11th, but 1893, at what happened to be the first Parliament of Religions. And to me, that moment of the first Parliament itself seemed like an act of premonition before nations were annexing each other. To imagine that the world we live in now, where essentially the battles are drawn across ideological and religious lines, seemed to be a premonition that probably marked the conception of that conference. I mean, I knew that I was inheriting something which had become large, but was extremely delicate and fragile. For me, at a curatorial level, I was very mindful of some of the questions that has come up in our conversation. The fact that audiences are going to bring different degrees of their own vocabulary of how they're going to read this project. I think I was drawn to certain coordinates, certain questions, certain ideas that I think would eventually end up translating. So I would actually go hoping that some of my questions are going to create a sort of self-organizing principle, both for making the project and also reading the project.
There are two ways, there are two kinds of public art. There is one that is more traditional that we know, whose form is cultural. It is a work that is more unidirectional, and where there's not really necessary to have a connection with the work, what it is representing, and the city. So there's another kind of work in public spaces, which refers to what Samira implies for, which is a work that is, it's not spectacular, it's not provocative, it's not static, and it is a work that needs or that has a direct engagement with the place, so the site, and people who are living or occupying that space. Now, the reason why we started this kind of practice was fundamentally survival. Basically, we were asking, how can art and the discourse on art survive if it continues to happen in a kind of abstract or self-referential context? And also, how can art continue to survive if it is removed from our everyday reality? So what we did literally was to open up the windows, and we said, let fresh air enter and start to circulate. And when that started to happen, the artistic process began to open up, which meant that the aesthetic practice or paradigm also began to stretch, where the work started to become affected by external factors that was entering. So the work begins to get affected by the people at a specific space. So the work they're doing, their behavior, their habits, their skills. Also, the material of the work is no longer limited to the material, to the technical, but it becomes also stretched, where the artist and the work starts to deal with at one side ideas of territory, socioeconomic differences, migrant labor, and what is happening at this time to the aesthetic experience is that it is also starting to expand from being just perceptual to also relational.
So sometimes one wonders what really is art and what is really the intersection of art and ecology. So is it art when you take a 200-acre basalt quarry like this, which is absolutely devastated, and you work on it with ecology, with an idea of nature for a period of 8 years, and you convert something like this into a place that is like this, and that over, then becomes a self-sustaining sort of ecology that becomes a home for 100 different sort of species of birds, stockfish fish, and it kind of finds a life of its own, and it lives on its own. So this was done many, many years back, and it continues to sort of regenerate and live. And you have the hand of God with you when you do something like this. So I don't know whether this qualifies as some art, but one feels very blessed to do something like that. Or is it really again art when you take a house where you build a bridge that runs through the house on a higher area, and it starts with the idea of a very sculpted, a very precise sort of sense of landscape, and it rises slowly from there up the steps and goes up, and it sort of leaves this very precise landscape behind and rides the cusp. On one side there is the ordered landscape, and the other side there is the natural or the wilder or the ecological sort of landscape. And it bisects through the house and goes through the house and descends onto the other side into something that's wild nature, and it sort of then connects to the fields. So does it then tell a story of the way that man looks at nature and things of that kind? Because you're a landscape architect or an architect, you have some responsibility to be able to communicate to the kind of people that are going to come. And I somehow don't seem to work from the assumption that people will be able to sort of raise their awareness or raise their perception methods so quickly when they're coming to a space or something else altogether. They're actually not coming to look at art in this case. They're coming here to get their daughters married and things like that. But on the other hand, I would take a slightly different tack when I'd probably do the Navy Art Foundation or this art building, because at some level I know that the people who are going to come there are going to be connoisseurs of art at a certain level. So I tend to want to do the conversation at different levels continuously, depending on who I think is the audience.
That everything around you is extremely dense with context and meaning, and hence you kind of work through, you make art through art all around you. As an artist, you actually do not have a manual of instructions of how somebody might use a work or a mandate for yourself of why you're doing it. And if you knew it, you wouldn't do it. And I think it's really a process of realization.
Because if you happen to spend more time with the work, the work starts to play with you on different levels. So you start to realize, or you start to connect the dots as you said. You start to look for where you are and how far you are from your departure or destination.
How can you translate what you did at the quarry in, say, Lodha, where you have gardens, and I noticed like gardens means a lawn, a curated lawn, and then curated plants. Isn't there any way of making it a little more interactive with people in terms of, I don't know, say a forest, a food garden?
But there is a problem when you start looking at real estate, and it's a tricky thing. You can begin to do it for private developments or more controlled institutional developments. When you start doing it for real estate developments, then at some level, people living there have to sort of want to take the onus of taking care of that going forward. There's only so much that you can begin to do as food gardens, and then who regulates all that? We are acutely worried about what happens to these gardens when we leave them, because typically in the real world, a society gets formed. The developer goes. It doesn't matter whether it could be anyone. The developer goes, the society takes over, and the first thing that the society does is look at all the unnecessary expenses that are there. So, if there are 4 lifts, then 3 work, 1 is shut down, and the garden is the first victim, because, who the hell wants to spend money on the garden? If you look at some of the other work that we've done, which is more private, it's wilder, but you do a wild landscape, it's actually far more difficult to maintain than one of these manicured ones, because then at least the guy knows exactly what to do. So we're mindful of all that too. Will the world change? Will real estate start planting meadows and forests? I wait the day, I guess,
Did you really think of something like this, as in what sort of egged you on to create this forum?
When we started Art Oxygen, as I mentioned during the presentation, we really wanted to test what function art could have in spaces where we have little control, in spaces that are always changing, but also where the form has little control, and we have little control over the sense of production of the work. Especially in a city like Bombay, people are actually very opinionated. They will ask you why your work is there, why it's intruding into their space. If they like what they're seeing, they will come and engage with it. And if they absolutely have no intention, or the work really interferes with, they will forcibly force us to remove it. So I think what we were trying to do was allow that risk of failure, but also in that process where artistic practice is placed in context where we need to really validate ourselves, and where we're really trying to test the role of art in the everyday life of the city through what we call the metaphor of the encounter, which is our primary project in different spaces. I was really happy that today the talk had a landscape architect, Jitish Kallat, who is doing one kind of public art practice, which is sculptural and very institutional also. And then us, that is completely, radicalizing artistic practice, and also what our imagination of public art should or could be in our cities. Just coming together of really different disciplines and bringing in our own way our ideas and a kind of sharing, and how we can all maybe take from each other, and within this context of the exhibition itself. So the landscape, how we think of the garden, how the garden on one hand is a very meditative space, but it's also a space for gathering. It's a space where you start to think, and it's a space where you can start to question, and how the garden becomes a place of provocation also. So that for me was quite
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you here, and we'll stay in touch, Leandre. Thank you all of you for taking time out. My mind, and the reason why we brought art, landscape, and people together was also that I think it has a very significant role at a very super conscious level, and if you catch on to it, then there's a lot to take. You can still otherwise